Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter. Bill Watterson retired his comic strip Calvin and Hobbes more than 30 years ago, but its legacy endures. The young boy and his tiger friend regularly escape the confines of reality to explore matters of philosophy, ethics, theology, science, and more. Joining me to talk about this is Terry Mattingly. Terry is the former editor of Get Religion, journalist and professor who writes at the Rational Sheep blog. You can follow his work on X at Tweet Mattingly. Terry, great to speak with you again. How are you?
Glad to be here.
It's been a while, right? So how have things been with you?
Well, this essay was inspired by the fact that we got to spend a week with most of our grandkids who are part of a home, they're not a homeschooling family. Their parents are leaders in efforts to build Orthodox classical schools. And so they are very much young and rambunctious kids, but at the same time, they are readers. So they started taking Latin in the second grade and Greek in the third. They're unusual kids, and they're a lot of fun to be around.
And one of the ways in which you gather together and have a lot of fun as grandparents with them is to curl up with the complete Calvin and Hobbes set. Tell us about how that started.
Well, I'm a fan of Calvin and Hobbes, especially the remarkable theme that runs through Calvin and Hobbes of Calvin being addicted to television and how television keeps getting in the way of his imaginations. And of course, he's named John Calvin, and human depravity and the theology of all that. Well, Hobbes, the tiger, represents a completely opposite approach to life. And you have these theological and philosophical battles going on between the kid and the tiger. But it was the material about television that got my attention. So I bought, fearing that someday we wouldn't have these things around, I bought 3 hardback editions of Calvin and Hobbes. And those things probably, have you ever seen a set in hardback?
No, I haven't.
They gotta weigh 15, 20 pounds. So these are really substantial things. And for years, the first thing that would happen when the kids would walk in the door of our house is they would run and grab the Calvin and Hobbes books. And I must admit some hardback copies of Far Side as well. But Calvin and Hobbes is the essential one. And I eventually bought them their own paperback set of the complete Calvin and Hobbes, the whole decade, in books. And still, even though they have their own set, the minute they hit our house, it's off to Calvin and Hobbes. And what I have found, and what I wrote this essay about at Rational Sheep, is that this is an example of the kind of fun reading that parents and grandparents can use to have meaningful conversations with children. And the more we see horrific things like the current cover story at The Atlantic about how people are no longer reading for pleasure and they no longer have the attention span to read. I think this is something that parents and the churches that hope to inspire parents and help parents, I think this is something our churches are going to have to start taking seriously. And that's why I brought it up at Rational Sheep, which is a project discussing faith, family, and life in the digital age.
I'm really glad you brought that up because my good friend Brian Shanley shared with me that he himself personally knows children who learned how to read by means of developing a kind of sustained focus because of an encounter with Calvin and Hobbes. And I invite your thoughts there in terms of, like you mentioned, we are in a digital milieu and children are no longer inducted into a society that has a witness of sustained engagement of the written text.
Yeah, and that affects everything. That affects school. That affects church. I had an interview with Jonathan Haidt, the author of, the bestseller, mega bestseller, The Anxious Generation, about the impact of smartphones and social media. And in the midst of our conversation, which I wrote in columns, my national columns for McNeil Andrews Syndicate, and then I wrote about it again at Rational Sheep, he just said basically religious leaders are not involved in a fair fight if they think that having minimal attention from children for 1 or 2 hours a week at church is going to in any way replace the life online that many young people now say they basically are online constantly. They live online. Mm-hmm. They are never far away from a gentle buzz on the smartphone that is with them everywhere, that distracts them and pulls them out of whatever it is they're supposed to be doing, which is now we're having all kinds of public discussions about banning smartphones at school. And it's interesting to me that while progressive states like California and New York have done a lot to ban smartphones in schools, I've been looking on websites and stuff, and I don't think there's a unified approach yet on this very same issue from a lot of religious schools, Catholic schools, Lutheran schools, and others. So the whole purpose of my website is to say that at some point, churches are going to have to get involved in these issues. And it could be something as silly as a weekend for kids where you hand Calvin and Hobbes books around, let them draw pictures of Calvin and Hobbes, and then ask them what they see in these cartoon strips that they think is worth talking about, or even just ask them what their favorites are and then talking about it. It's kind of silly, but at some point we have to realize that helping children learn how to read is not silly.
I'm really grateful that you're bringing this up, because what you're effectively saying is any tool that can be discerned within reason that is meritorious for the sake of engaging and inculcating a habit and imagination for reading ought to be employed, because we are fighting against a tidal wave that's trying to destroy their little imaginations from the act of reading. Terry? Well, it appears I might have lost Terry, and as we attempt to get him back, one of the points that Terry's trying to make here, which is so profound, is that we no longer have a culture and a society that is centrally focused on the imaginations cultivated by the written text. And there were points in society where the written text was the more ubiquitous form of media. Now, this could be for imaginative novels, it could be for prose, it could be for poetry, but regardless of the situation, we had cultures formed around written works. And there was a kind of ubiquitousness, a kind of unilateral understanding of what made good written works. And together, these things formulated the collective imagination. And here in the West, we were blessed with this large heritage, an entire repository of what we call the great books. We can go all the way back to Roman and Grecian Hellenistic literature, but even here in the United States of America, the great American novels that formed the American imagination. What Terry's trying to posit here is, because we have come so far from that age, especially with the ubiquitousness now of digital media, digital spheres, and digital technology, we have to, in some sense, labor for and clamor for the imagination of our children. We have to ensure that we're doing everything we can with whatever tools we have to try to reinvigorate a desire and love of reading. Now, one of the ways my bride and I do this is we're both readers, and so our children see mommy and daddy reading, and whenever we sit down, one of the first things they do is they bring their favorite books and make us read it out loud to them. And so we try to have a practice in the family where we won't say no to reading a book out loud to them unless it's bedtime or it's time for prayer. And these little things help stoke their imaginations to understand that reading opens up a doorway for the formulation of whole worlds, world building in their minds, that helps them develop eventually a sacramental, liturgical, religious imagination. We're going to continue with Terry on the other side of the break. Stay tuned. I'm Marcus Peter. Good afternoon and welcome back. I'm Marcus Peter, blessed to be joined by Terry Mattingly, former editor of Get Religion, journalist and professor, who writes at the Rational Sheep blog. Terry, I normally don't ask this of guests who accidentally dropped off, but in this case, I was told that you have a humorous anecdote about what happened.
Well, it was a teleprompter who's been stalking me for weeks, and no matter how many of these fake phone messages I block, and try to get rid of, the calls keep coming. And there is nothing we can do to control them in this age without cutting off any phone calls from all kinds of people that I want to hear from. Anyway, back to reading.
Yes, indeed. Back to reading. Clearly, these telemarketers could do a little more reading and a lot less.
Well, I think they're AI, which gets us back to the whole subject of the growth of digital media, smartphones, and the looming presence of AI, which the Pope, by the way, mentioned the other day again in his message at the Vatican Summer Youth Camp. And I'm going to be quoting that anecdote from the Pope in my column this week, my national column.
Tell us about it.
He simply said that what he's been stressing all along is that smartphones and things like that, as he put it, they can be fun, they can be a help, they can be a nice thing. But at some point, it doesn't even, he says, even if you have the Bible and some prayers on the phone, that isn't what God is interested in. God is interested in actual human communication, actual prayers, and more Bible reading. Now, what's interesting, and this is what my column is about, the Pope gave those words 3 days after the release of Toy Story 5, which is a movie about digital tablets taking control of the lives of young people. Which brings us back to Calvin and Hobbes and ink on paper and the need to read.
Wow, I never thought that references to Toy Story would be pertinent to any conversation I'd have. I appreciate.
No, you should see this film. It is not a sermon. It's more like a parable. And the key there is that, try to imagine this in a Pixar movie. I mean, where I don't think fathers are ever seen. At the end of the movie, a father and a mother together work together to get their 8-year-old out of the control of chat groups and this tablet that's taken over her life.
Wow.
And I'd be willing, when that comes out on a DVD, I'd be willing to have a church retreat with parents to show the movie and talk about that. In fact, I'm speaking at a Catholic conference this fall in Wisconsin on precisely that subject.
So going back to Calvin and Hobbes, then there are obviously a lot of ways to induct one into a life of reading, and a lot of comic books as pathways forward. Why particularly Calvin and Hobbes? Not that I'm saying you're saying it's the best of the best, but what are the merits here of Calvin and Hobbes?
Well, the simple fact is that anything positive and good that parents and children can read and then discuss is a doorway into reading. When I was a kid, it was, old-fashioned stuff. It was the Hardy Boys. It was my favorites, Little House on the Prairie. I grew up in the plains of North Texas. And it was those sorts of things. And my mother was a language arts teacher, and we talked about books all the time. With my own children, it was, of course, Chronicles of Narnia. My daughter read The Hobbit the summer after second grade and The Lord of the Rings the summer after third. Her wedding cake had the opening prayers of the Orthodox wedding rite written in Elvish by her fiance turned husband, who speaks and writes Elvish as well as Latin. And so we grew up as a bookish family, and we shared these books. And we had a rule that you never watched a movie until you had read the book, because we were teaching our children that there's more story in the book. And C.S. Lewis wrote the real Narnia story in the books. People can struggle to put them on screens, and we're all kind of bracing ourselves for Netflix Narnia with Meryl Streep as the voice of Aslan and whatever else happens. But the books remain something that can unite parents and children.
Can you share with us, there's something particularly unique about the way Bill Watterson thought of Calvin as a character. What is, I guess one might say, the almost perennial or enduring quality about this character that draws children and adults back to him?
Well, I mean, to me, the most poignant thing is that Watterson, in addition to giving up this cartoon strip after only a decade, Watterson passed up, I would say, millions of dollars because he refused to license the rights to the image of Calvin and Hobbes. And specifically, he did not want anyone creating a Hobbes doll, a stuffed animal Hobbes. He said, because in the cartoon, Hobbes is a stuffed doll, but in the boy's mind, heart, and imagination, he's real. And he said, you can't read the comic strip without realizing the importance of the boy's imagination and the importance of the boy's yearning for his own world and his own visions of things. And this can lead to conversations over and over with children about the importance of play, the importance of their imaginations, the importance of the stories they make up and the things that they create. But how much of that can happen in a world in which, according to an Australian study of world research on this topic, the average or the majority of 2-year-olds now in our world have access to a digital device. And most of them have their own before preschool. And what shook me up the most was a reference that they were beginning to see increasing numbers of children with exposure to tablets and screen devices at 6 months of age.
Boy.
To 2 years of age. I'm thinking, what are parents doing? Putting them in the playpen? And that's literally what they're doing. Well, that's not going to help the imaginations of children. That's not going to help them learn to play. That's not going to help their minds develop, their bodies develop, relationships with their parents develop. So we're going back and forth here between the message of this film, Toy Story 5, and the importance of reading. And sure enough, in the movie Toy Story 5, the positive families are shown with books and are shown out camping together and sitting up around a fire talking to each other at night and all kinds of wholesome activities like that. Whereas the negative vision of the world is a vision of the family's neighborhood from above, and all the windows contain glowing screens with parents and children sitting separately, each using their own devices. Now, folks, if this isn't an issue worthy of attention from the church, I don't know what is. And I think we need to be asking our pastors, our priests, our teachers, and others to say, parents can't handle this alone, especially not with AI coming.
Mm-hmm.
Parents can't handle this alone. It's time for the church to care about the heart, minds, and souls of kids growing up in this age.
As a parent and now grandparent, I ask you, what is the draw? Well, clearly, I didn't grow up with digital technology. It was introduced late in my teens, and its ubiquitousness arrived somewhere in my late 20s, mid-20s, late 20s. But the context I'm trying to get at here is, what is the draw now of overtly utilizing digital screens to parent our children? Why the attraction?
Well, it's the same as television. When I was teaching at Denver Theological Seminary in the early 90s, I used to have students try to figure out the role that television was playing in their lives. And there was a Jewish writer named Marie Wynn who basically argued that parents were allowing the television to socialize their children. She said, we're letting people raise our children, that if the real characters raise our children, that if the real people showed up at our door, we would call 911. Well, that was television. AI is going to talk to your child. AI is going to make your child think they're real. We're now seeing lawsuits where children have committed suicide because the AI said, sure, if you are having trouble and suicide sounds like a good option, who am I to argue with you? And we've got marriages being broken up by imaginary lovers and spouses and partners. All of that is beyond the smartphone in your pocket. But the smartphone in your pocket is the door through which the digital world comes into your life. And I'm just going to say it again. If the church won't help people deal with that, who is going to do it?
I thank you for not only speaking out about this, but also highlighting all of this with us. So we've got about 30 seconds or so left, Terry. Do you have something you'd like to share with parents, grandparents, and children, or the teenagers listening right now, about this whole phenomena?
Okay, parents, grandparents, give kids books. Then make sure that someone is reading books to them in their lives and talking to them, and then find out what books the children like to read. And when you can affirm that, that becomes gifts that form bonds between you, whereas smartphones and most digital devices divide you.
Terry, thank you very much. I've been talking with Terry Mattingly. He is a journalist, he is a professor, and he writes at the Rational Sheep blog. And he's been exhorting us to a very practical and needed reality. Give children books, read them out loud to them, and let's stoke and cultivate proper imaginations together. Stay tuned for the next hour. I'm Marcus Peter.